Okay, well, good morning. Like that? I love Google Image. I just put in the title of my talk and all these images come up. Anyway, so today's topic is your creative mind, the idea that we are all, you and I, creative beings. And it's one of the things that I think we sort of get, but the part we don't tend to get as readily is that the nature of our ability to create is only to give direction to the energy that flows into us as life. That we don't create the energy. We don't have to push the energy along. So your role in the creativity in your life is sort of the same as your role when you're driving your car. You just kind of have to steer it. You don't have to push the car along, ideally, unless you're the Flintstones or something. But so our focus needs to be on giving direction, on setting intention, on using your imagination to direct your mind toward an acceptance of whatever it is you seek. And when you come to fully accept whatever it is you seek, the universe does the rest. You know, I like to say I'm in sales, God's in manufacturing. My job is to sell myself on some great idea, and once I accept that fully, the universe tends to cooperate somehow. Now, nobody fully understands how this works, but you don't really need to. What you need to do is understand that with certain input, mental, emotional input, you get certain output. You know, many of you, if you've taken have a science background, I've talked about this before, they have a thing called a black box experiment. And a black box is a black box. And the idea is you know what you put into the black box, and you know what comes out of the black box, but you don't know what's inside the black box. Now imagine you had a black box that every time you put a quarter in, $1 came out on the other side. Okay? They're available in the bookstore. Okay? They're very expensive. But, you know, if you had a black box like that, and there was a warning label on the black box, it said, do not open the black box, or it will cease to function. Okay, now I know some of you would be driven crazy by that, because you'd want to get inside that black box and see what it is, but if every time you put a quarter in, you got $1 out, you'd probably at some point say, okay, I don't need to know what's inside the black box. I trust that every time I put a quarter in, I get $1 out. Now, many of us have to go through this lots of times every day. Every time you flip on a light switch, you probably don't know how the light comes on. You know, before you flip on the switch, you don't get up and examine all the wires and everything and make sure that everything's exactly the way it should be. You flip on the switch, and with enough experience, you expect the light to come on. In fact, you'd be surprised if it didn't. When you start your car, I doubt that many of you understand everything that's happening between the key making the connection in the ignition switch and all the other things it has to go through to actually get the car started. Yet you know that every time I put the key in and turn it, well, most times, depending on your car, it starts. And that's good enough. And yet it's interesting how with our own psychology sometimes we don't necessarily trust. We want to know, well, why does that work or why doesn't it work? And the problem with our own psychology is that most of what's happening isn't happening in a tangible aspect of the universe that you can get in and really analyze. I mean, you know, you could have a thought and then take the top of your head off and, you know, look inside with instruments and things. I don't recommend it, but you could do that, but I don't think you'd find much that would explain how that internal process works. Even today, with our advanced fMRI scanning and things where they can tell that when you're thinking this, that part of your brain lights up and all, they've never seen a thought. They've seen the effect of a thought, that some part of your brain lights up when you think or feel a certain thing. You see, but that's not really where the whole thing's happening. Some of it's physical, and some of it's non-physical. So I recommend you treat it like a black box. know that there is a relationship between what you think and how you feel and how you experience your life. And that when you understand that dynamic, you can design what you think and how you feel to produce more of what it is you desire and less of what it is you don't desire. Kind of a simple concept. Sometimes creativity is seen as something very isolated, that, you ever felt like good ideas are hard to come by, that there's a whole lot of dark ideas or bad ideas out there, and that a good creative idea is pretty rare. But in fact, that's not really so. We believe that every thought is creative. It just may not be creating what you want. See, the issue isn't, am I being creative? You are. You just might be creating the same old thing that you created yesterday. Or you might be recreating the same problems that you demonstrated sometime before because you haven't changed the input. See, if I was putting something in the black box and something nasty was coming out the other side, wouldn't it be stupid to keep putting in the thing that brought out the result I didn't want? Yet, that's what we do. Okay, anyone ever sabotage their own success? Ever? How about this morning? Yeah, we do that. You say, why did I do that? Well, partly it's because we may not understand the process of how our mind works, and partly it is once we get into a habit pattern that may be a little bit destructive, they call it a habit pattern because we tend to repeat it, even though you may consciously not want to repeat it. That's, you have good habits and bad habits. Bad habits are the things we define as things that are maybe destructive or harmful. And yet, have you ever done anything that's destructive or harmful over a period of time, repetitively? I'm guessing you probably have. And you say, why do I do that? Well, there's two reasons why we do that. Either we're ignorant of what's going on, or we have some kind of a fear about it, or both. So the teaching here is about waking up to what really is going on and learning to use the mechanism of creativity that you possess and are using all the time, just to use it more wisely. Ernest Holmes says, we must say that all thought is creative according to the nature, impulse, emotion, or conviction behind the thought. Thought creates a mold in the subjective, which is another word for subconscious, in which the idea is accepted and poured and sets power in motion in accordance with the thought. One of the lines I used in the meditation is from the Bible, is as I think I am. As I think I am. Because what I do with my thoughts, and thoughts, when I use the term thought, I'm talking about 3 dimensions. I'm talking about any language you might use, words, any images or pictures, and then any feelings that go with it. So my thoughts accumulate to build beliefs in my subconscious mind according to the impulse, emotion, or conviction behind the thought. The more emotion behind the thought, the more powerful it is. If you have a thought with no emotion behind it, it doesn't do anything to your subconscious mind. I might say, gee, where's that spoon I set down here? Now, there's no emotion there, so that's not going to really have much effect on me. But I might say, where's the spoon I set down here? Now, that has an effect, and it probably a negative one given the emotion I was expressing. So here's a thing you can pay attention to. Well, before I get to that, I thought I had a picture in there. Imagine that next to your bed, before you get into bed at night, you had a scale that measured the totality of your emotion for the day. That if you took the last, since you woke up, all those hours, and it averaged out positive and negative emotion, and when you stood on the scale, it would say which way you lean for that day, positive, negative, or neutral. Okay. Now, if you had such a scale, what do you think it would show on your average day? what is the emotional set, the emotional sense of your average day? How often are you cursing out other people? How often are you feeling low? How often are you disappointed, unsatisfied or dissatisfied, unhappy? And if you added all that up, how would that compare with its opposite, where you're happy, where you're satisfied, where you're up, where you're feeling love? And if you took the average day and averaged it all out, what would it look like? Well, if it's neutral or negative, what that means is that in general that day you didn't make progress toward a greater realization of what is possible for you. Because the more negative feeling we have, the more we move in that direction. And even if we average out to 0, that means no change. So if I want to change in my life toward what? Toward a feeling of being more fulfilled, of happier, of whatever it is like that, I have to be making progress against the mean every day of more positive than negative. It's energy. And the energy accumulates within your subconscious as memory. We don't save the emotional energy, but we save the memory of it and the beliefs that come from it. And when something triggers one of those beliefs, the relevant emotion just pops up. That's called an attitude. Anybody ever had an attitude? Okay. An attitude, is an aviation term. If you're a pilot, you look and there's a little dial. I guess now it's probably digital, but back in the day it would be a little dial that would show the relationship of your wings to the horizon. And you were said, you'd have a positive attitude or a negative attitude. Well, you can imagine with you as a human being, a positive attitude means you lean toward something. A negative attitude means you lean away from it. So we have a positive attitude about that which we're drawn to. The problem is some of us actually develop habit patterns of being in a negative attitude pattern. We're in the habit of being negative. You may know some negative people. You may have been one once. There's a support group that meets at the bar. A negative person where you say, look what the kids are doing. They're having fun. Oh, they're making a big mess. No matter what you say, they make it negative. Right? Isn't this food delicious? It's not as good as the meal I had once when I was 7. Now, where does that attitude come from? See, it's not like the attitude just popped up new. It's there in storage, waiting for something to trigger it. And the interesting thing is you don't necessarily know you have the attitude until it shows up. Well, I didn't know I had an attitude about that. Right? But we have attitudes about almost everything. Read the newspaper. You'll have all kinds of things pop up. Oh, I like it. Look at this. Isn't this awful? Oh, look, isn't this wonderful? The attitude that you have right now, you have an attitude about what I'm saying. You have an attitude about attitudes. But whatever attitude you're experiencing while you're in this room, you brought into the room with you. They were preset, pre-programmed, if you will. And then I might say something that triggers one. I could say something like, baby kittens and chocolate chip cookies. I could say something like, IRS audit. I could say something controversial like death penalty or abortion, and we'd have different attitudes showing up. See? And all I have to do is say the word, and boom, there's the attitude. Now, the next question is, do I have anything to say about my attitudes? And the answer is yes, we do. If I don't like an attitude that shows up, and remember, I don't know I've got it till it shows up, then I can change the attitude by reprogramming that element, because I did get that attitude by programming it to begin with. And maybe, we have a lot of attitudes we learned as kids. You have to be taught what to get angry at. I don't know if you know that or not. You're not born angry or knowing what to get angry about. You're born with the capacity for anger. But, your parents teach you when you're a little kid what to get angry at. And you find little kids getting angry at stuff they don't even understand because their dad gets angry at it or something, All these damn tools, I've probably told this before. When I was a new police officer, see, when you're new in a place and you want to be accepted by the group, one of the things you do subconsciously is you find out what they get angry at. You get angry at the same stuff. Like you go to a school and you automatically find out who the rival school is, and you hate them. Right? You get angry if they win or something. So when I was a new police officer, one of the things they did shortly after I got there was they changed the form that you used for a traffic accident report. Now, the forms for traffic accident reports are pretty much the same everywhere. It's like 1 million boxes on this sheet, and they're all over the place, and there's it's just a nightmare to fill out. There are certain officers that love to do that were always very suspect, in my mind, because it's not real police work, right? You're sitting there filling out boxes for at least 90 minutes after an accident. Well, they're not really accidents, are there? They're crashes, because there are no accidents. Anyway, so about 90 days after I started, the state of Florida put out a new accident form that had all the same information, but it was all rearranged. So, when it got easy to write the report when you knew where all the boxes were. But they changed where the boxes were. So you had to pay attention. And this really pisses the cops off when they have to pay attention. Now, I was new enough that I hadn't learned how to do the first form yet. But I got angry that those idiots up in Tallahassee don't know what they're doing. They got nothing better to do, a bunch of bureaucrats making up our forms. And bonding with my fellow officers. You see, that's how you get an attitude. We learn what to get angry at based on how we want to affiliate. Kind of interesting. Martin Luther King, you may have heard of him, said, "Human salvation lies in the hands of the creatively maladjusted." Human salvation lies in the hands of the creatively maladjusted. And what he meant by that is that most of the big-time decision makers in our system, in our political system, in our business system, are creatively maladjusted. They're people with bad habits that don't understand they have bad habits, and they tend to make creatively bad decisions. Now, you may have an attitude about that. You ever been involved with something in a system that everybody knew it didn't make sense, but nobody knew how to change it? Why is it this way? Because it's always been this way. I used to have a sign in my office when I was in the police department. It said, 200 years of tradition unmarred by progress. Because progress always upsets tradition. It means you have to change something that's traditional, that you've done before. And you ever notice that people get attached to tradition? And there's nothing wrong with that. But there is that kind of dynamic going on. Now, take it outside of an organization and put it in you. You have traditions. In your personal life, you may have a tradition of continually failing every time you get near success. You may have a tradition of getting into relationships and managing to mangle them within 12 to 18 months. No matter who else is on the other end of the equation with the relationship. And you always blame the other person. We have these patterns, right? And we know that we know we're not happy with them, but we don't necessarily know that we have some control over them. And even sometimes when you find out you do have the ability to redirect them, you don't. because you're so habitually attached to that way of being. Creatively maladjusted. That doesn't mean not creative. It means using creativity in a way that doesn't work. That doesn't work. Rumi, the great mystical poet, said, "Inside you there's an artist you don't know about. Say yes quickly if you know, if you've known it from before the beginning of the universe." See, we suspect that there's something within us that it has this creative intelligence, it has this power. We suspect that we have this capacity that we're not using, but we can't figure it out. And that's sort of like wanting to get inside the black box. I don't need to get in the black box to use my creativity. I need to recognize that what I think is directly linked to what happens. And when something is happening that I don't like to have happen, I need to rethink. Rather than, what do you do when you have a problem, when things don't go well? Anybody focus on what's not going well? Anybody ever do that? You know, say you wake up with the flu, let's say. Where does your mental energy go relating to the flu? Or a sore elbow, you know, or an idiot brother. You know, what do you think about? And I want you to pay attention as you go through this week. Where do you dwell emotionally in relation to issues in your life? Do you dwell on what's possible and what can be, or do you dwell on what is? Because it is. And you notice the more you dwell on it, the bigger it gets. We can turn a minor thing into a huge issue by focusing that kind of energy onto it, that kind of emotional, fear-based, negative energy onto it. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. What you dwell upon expands in your experience. And we all know that, but yet we do it anyway, don't we? Do you ever make a mountain out of a molehill? Mm-hmm. The inner artist is that creative, essential intelligence and talent within you that knows what to do and how to do it. But what keeps that inner artist restrained sometimes is we've created a series of habits around it that keep it boxed in. We're afraid to break out of our routine. We're afraid to maybe put things at risk in order to try something new. I saw a quote the other day. It was a picture of a guy standing by a tree, and I'm just paraphrasing. It was a little poem. It was about, I look at the bird in the tree, and I wonder, with all the capacity to fly, why does he just sit in that tree? And then I wonder the same thing about myself. Why do I stay in place when maybe I'm not happy with the place I'm in? Not necessarily a physical place, but the mental, emotional, relational place that I'm in. Eric Butterworth, the great unity teacher, said, "You're never more than one thought or one idea away from all the wealth in the universe." One thought, one idea. And yet, if I haven't developed the habit of thinking creatively and encouraging my creative self, I'm very likely to avoid that thought at all costs. Because I've decided this is the reality. I've built a box around myself. And anything outside of that, I better not think about. I better not let myself go there. Ernest Holmes' brother, Fenwick Holmes, wrote this in 1919. In feeling is the creative power, and there is the real divinity of man. One's first impression is that it lies in thought, but deeper than thought is the power that produces it and the feeling that creates it. We think because we feel. Creation is not directly in thought, but in feeling. Every word we speak is a creative word, but it is the feeling that it expresses and which accompanies it that creates. The deepest feeling produces the highest creation. A word spoken in love produces harmony in body and ease in conditions. A word spoken in hate throws poison into the blood and produces physical discord for the hater. This is the more easily understood when we think of the creative mind in terms of subjective mind. Again, that would be subconscious to us. This mind is the seat of all emotions and feelings. The objective mind, or the conscious mind, has only memories of the emotions that have been experienced. The subjective mind is simply another name for creative mind, and therefore the creative mind acts on the feeling, which in essence it is. See, you'll see the word thought in the Science of Mind textbook hundreds of times. You don't see the word feeling that much, but he included feeling in thought, because a thought without a feeling doesn't do anything. That's why it's important when we do our spiritual work, when you do whether it's prayer or whether it's affirmations or whether it's just trying to be, inspire yourself, that the focus is on the feeling. People say, I don't know how to write a prayer treatment. Well, you don't have to know how. Begin with, just think of something, let's just do this right now. Just think of something you'd like to have in your life that isn't there now. Or maybe it's there, but you'd like to have more of it. Okay, you got something you want, right? Maybe it's a new car, maybe it's a new spouse, maybe it's a new house, maybe it's just to be calm and cool and collected, maybe it's to feel good about yourself, maybe it's to have better health. Maybe it's to have a deeper experience of the relationship you're in. Whatever. Just pick one for now. Now, some people might say, well, I don't know what it would look like even. But let me share this with you. I think even if you can't get an image of what it would look like to have that experience, you know what it would feel like to have what you desire, right? If your life were really working, if you're hitting on all cylinders, as they say, you can imagine what that would feel like. Not to have anything holding you back or holding you down. And just imagine that feeling. And what you would do would be imagine every time you think about that issue, you just imagine that feeling. And maybe out of that you say, okay, now what is an image that would help me to feel that feeling when I think about it? So I might think about maybe being able to move my body in a way that I can't right now because of a health issue. Being able to look down and see my feet because I've lost weight. Something like that. If it's a weight loss thing, going into the store and buying dresses with the different color tags for the smaller size. Looking in the mirror and seeing your body shape being the way you want it to be. If it's a relationship, it might be having the experience of sharing a meal with a certain person and having that rich conversation at depth. It might be sitting down to pay your bills and knowing that there'll be a huge balance left in the checkbook when you finish. So you see, you start with the feeling, then you back it up and say, okay, what kind of images? It can be more than one. It can be more than one. What kind of images would help me to feel that feeling? And then when you've got the images, you say, okay, now how can I write a sentence that'll remind me of that image? And you might have 5 or 6 sentences for any specific change to give you different images that basically give you the same feeling, though. And boom, you're transforming yourself. And then during the day, when you're not paying attention to what's written down and everything, and that issue comes up, you're confronted with that current limitation, go to the feeling that you desire. What would it feel like if I didn't have this problem? And let that feeling wash through your system. Because when that feeling becomes the default feeling when you think about that issue, the issue will dissolve. It will transform. It will be removed or it will be changed. Because what's keeping the limitation in place is your current feeling about it. And quite often it's just that you've decided to own it. That yes, this is my problem and I'm putting a lot of energy into it. What if you just remove that energy? It would simply deflate. Now you might say, I don't think that's so. This is a real problem. Well, I would agree it is a real problem. Real in the sense that, like everything else in this universe, if it isn't supported by consciousness, it doesn't exist. It's a fact that you have a limitation that you're experiencing, but facts change. Facts change as the consciousness behind them changes. Michael Shea said, creativity is seeing something that doesn't exist already. You need to find out how you can bring it into being and that way be a playmate with God. That way be a playmate with God. Now, if you imagine spirit, God, as being that aspect of you that wants to have a good time by means of you. God wants to have a good time by means of you. One of my colleagues, Reverend Pat Campbell, wrote a book by that. Are you showing God a good time? Imagine God just spent the last week with you. How much fun did God have? How inspiring was God's experience to be with you? How was it a high level of conversation that was going on and a high level of thought and feeling? Were you out experiencing life to the fullest? I'm guessing maybe not. Well, there was that one afternoon that things were okay, you know? So if God is that aspect of you, that is the spark of life, that brought you into being to experience being you, and gave you the capacity to direct your own experience, what are you doing with that capacity? That's a good question. And the answer to it would be, I am maximizing my capacity to experience life today. Hang on, God, here we go. Get ready. No more screwing around. This is serious business, being full of mirth. Being full of joy is a serious business. You have to attend to it. You have to put the right input into the black box to get the right output out. The old-time computer saying, I don't even use it anymore, G-I-G-O, garbage in, garbage out. Right? Well, joy in, joy out. Creativity in, creativity out. Happiness in, happiness out. If I use my creative mind to create the kind of expectations of good that I'm capable of creating, my life will be filled with good. That's the way life works. And when we have a different experience, what do? We try to rationalize why we're having this different experience, often blaming someone else, or even blaming God, thinking that God is conspiring against you. Well, that's just dumb. I'm sorry, it just is. God is not interested in you having a bad life. God has given you everything that you need to live a good life. It's up to you to use it. It's up to you to use it. I had an aunt who was an elderly woman when I was a kid, and her sons bought her a car. This was back in the 50s, and she called it a machine. Okay, when she was a little girl, it was horses and buggies, rather. And she never learned to drive. And they figured, we'll get Mom a car, and she'll drive and go around town. And she never got in the car. Sat in the driveway. All that potential to go and to be able to explore whatever it was, to even just go to the grocery store, unused potential. Because she never got in it and started it up. How many of us have the equivalent in our consciousness of that unused potential because we haven't gotten in and turned the key on what we can be doing, what we can be experiencing, what we can be living? And it doesn't mean you have to be having a peak experience every minute. It means, though, that every minute you can be satisfied with who you are and know that you live in a world that is filled with potential. That's what it means. I'm just going to close with this great saying by Tagore. Whenever our life is stirred by truth, it expresses energy and comes to be filled, as it were, with a creative ardor. This consciousness of the creative urge is evidence of the force of truth in our mind. We have the creative urge within us. I have it in me, you have it in you. Sometimes we develop a style that lets us convince ourselves that we don't. And we sit and we wait for the world to show up in a certain way. It can't show up in any way except the way you create for you. So my plea to you is to be who you really are, not who you can be, who you already are. To really, occupy the space you occupy with a consciousness of the expectation of good. And your problems will simply dissolve because there's nothing left to support them. So thank you and namaste.